Hello again, my name is David Garofalo, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Membership and Marketing here at IANA. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, sponsored by Bloom Global, Intermodal Industry Transformation, Technology, Competitiveness, and Evolution. Let's go ahead and get started now. We'll introduce our panelists today. We have Bill Shea, the CEO of DCLI, and he has been the CEO and an investor in the company since 2012. In that capacity, he has shaped the strategic vision of DCLI and facilitated the acquisition of major legacy chassis fleets while maintaining oversight of the company's growth and financial performance. Mr. Shea's remarkable career in the transportation industry spans almost 40 years. Shea co-founded Kelly Transportation Services in 1984 and Bay Cities Leasing in 1989, managed the first domestic container and chassis pool called EMP for Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern in 1994, oversaw the creation of DCLI in 2012, and was the thought leader behind the 2015 creation of the Pool of Pools, the gray daily use chassis pool that operates in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. With 40 plus years of industry experience, he was honored by the Maritime Association of the Port of New York and New Jersey with his prestigious International Maritime Hall of Fame Award. He is joined today with Pravender Johar, the CEO of Bloom Global. He has a diverse background in supply chain management and technology. Across more than 3 decades, Johar has introduced solutions that have helped companies reduce their carbon emissions and foster logistics agility. He has led companies providing innovative solutions to the logistics industry, as well as managed global systems for companies such as Hewlett-Packard, and leveraging his experience in AI, robotics, process automation, and machine learning, Johar is guiding Bloom's next wave of transformative solutions. And with those introductions, 2 very impressive gentlemen, I'm going to turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you. I think we probably are going to get started with one thing that we missed on Bill. Bill was the person behind the formation of Bloom Global. So he and I worked together, and Bill was the chairman for Bloom till recently when we got acquired by Whitestech Global. So Bill, as always, it's a pleasure to be able to do a session with you. So with that, maybe let's start with chassis provisioning, right? So I know you spun out the company or formed the company in 2012. How has the chassis provisioning models, how have they changed since the formation of DCLI?
Well, thanks, Pravender. Also, David, I'd like to thank IANA for the opportunity to really discuss one of my favorite subjects, which is how technology, will change equipment pooling offerings over the next 5 to 10 years, and also look to drive intermodal growth. Pravender, a lot has changed in the last 10 years. When we acquired DCLI from Maersk in 2012, the marine chassis fleet was approximately 560,000 chassis. It was 50% owned by leasing companies, predominantly Track, DCLI, and FlexiVan, and 40% owned by ocean carriers, and only 10% owned or leased by motor carriers. The predominant chassis provisioning model at the time was a co-op pool where ocean carriers or IEPs contributed chassis into a gray pool, and ultimately these were rented or allocated to ocean carriers on a daily use basis. And what we've seen over the last 7 years is that ocean carriers followed Maersk's lead. They exited chassis ownership by selling their chassis to fleets to IPs and then entering into usage contracts with the IPs to utilize the purchased equipment in co-op or proprietary pools. During that period of 2012 to 2019, DCLI made over 20 marine and domestic chassis acquisitions. We now have a fleet of 275,000 chassis operating both in the marine and the domestic space, and being used by ocean carriers, railroads, motor carriers, and logistics. When we formed DCLI, the national chassis fleet was in really bad shape. I'd been in equipment manufacturing and leasing for almost 40 years. When I got in and saw the quality of the equipment, it was a concern. And a lot of it was deferred maintenance by the ocean carriers over the period. So major investments had to be made by IEPs on these fleets. And in the first 10 years of DCLI's ownership, we invested approximately $3 billion in new 53-foot equipment, refurbished our old marine units. And then my pet project, I helped railroads convert to radial tires back in 1999. And the ocean carriers were still utilizing, bias-ply tires as late as 2012. So that was one of the very first initiatives to convert our entire fleet. And it's been a 10-year journey and probably about $400 million. But we've now, by the end of 2024, we'll complete our transformation on the conversions, and all 275,000 DCLI chassis will be operating on radial tires. The big change in the model occurred in the last 5 to 7 years. And it really was driven by two different operational changes on terminals that led to fundamental shift, not only in the provisioning model, but also the customer mix. If you think about it, when I entered the business in 2012 on the marine side, roughly 65% of the marine terminals were grounded, and 35% rail, 35% wheeled. In the rail, it was 90% wheeled and 10% grounded. And if we fast forward just 10 years, 95% of marine, terminals are grounded, and over 60% of the rail terminals are grounded. So this shift from wheel to grounded operations in marine and rail terminals, it enabled users, motor carriers for the most part, to get live container lifts, and therefore they were able to utilize their own chassis because no motor carrier would ever want to leave a chassis on terminal for any extended period of time. So this has resulted in a really vibrant net lease market for chassis within the motor carrier community. And if you think about it today, 50% of all marine container shipments are moved via leased units. We call those trucker-owned wheels. And that's up from 10% just 10 years ago. And the models are really almost split 50-50 between pool products and net lease products. And even locations like New York, New Jersey are operating at 80% with private chassis fleets. The second operational change, which has really begun to occur in the last 2 to 3 years, is the initiative by marine and rail terminal operators to move containers and chassis off terminal. And this is to eliminate congestion and improve terminal fluidity. If we think about what happened during the pandemic, drop lots were created in LA, and over 100,000 containers were moved off terminals, to avoid detention or demurrage. It also improved truck turn times because the terminals have been so congested. And turn times has always been a major gripe of the drayage community. So the consequence of the drop lot phenomena, which we think is going to continue, is that it does create additional transportation nodes, right? And it results in more chassis moves. And more importantly, it creates some issues around data collection, which you're so familiar with, and billing issues, which are all going to require better asset management systems. I want to conclude here with just a thought about the structure of or the many alternatives that people have today in terms of chassis provisioning. So these two operational changes, wheel to grounded and move off terminal, right, have led to many innovative approaches in the last 3 or 4 years. DCLI currently refurbs about 5,000 chassis a year for net lease or full service lease to motor carriers. We still provide our single proprietary pool, right? But what we've seen is in locations like LA, Long Beach, the Southeast, and the Gulf, numerous private shipper and ocean carrier and motor carrier pools have popped up in the last couple of years. That was driven around capacity. And now we even have port-controlled pool products, VIT, Charleston, and Savannah. So all this has led to, in my view, a real opportunity for DCLI to strive to develop differentiated pooling products and service offerings. And it feeds right into your bailiwick, which is the technology play. So if you think about, Bloom's focus, right? What's been your focus for Bloom in the intermodal space? And you've just had this recent acquisition by WiseTech of Bloom Global. Where do you see Bloom and WiseTech going over the next few years?
So I think Bill but we launched Bloom in 2018. And at that time, we said that we're building a technology platform for intermodal, which can last 50 years or more. Now, 50 years sometimes seems like a very long time, but if you look at Bloom's history or Rejwan's history, next year we would have completed 30 years of EMP program. Right? So it's a long time, but it's also a very short time. Now we are talking about the 30 years. How do we continue for another 40, 50 years on that journey? So it's a platform very much focused on intermodal. And when we say intermodal, it can either be domestic intermodal or international intermodal. Just for me personally, lot of this started when I was working for probably the largest the largest company in the technology business back in 2008, 2009 time period, where almost everything we did was international in nature and intermodal in nature, both on the rail side and on the marine side. Right. So there we were able to build those connections. Build if you think of it, we had fairly large spend. We were a technology company. We were able to figure out how do you do rail from your favorite location, from Chongqing in China all the way to Prague. And that rail connectivity, if I still remember it, that I think the New York Times called it the new Silk Route, and it was that it went through 7 countries in summer, and you had to figure out how the rail container can keep on moving without stopping, do the customs clearance and all other things on that side, or 11 countries when it was winter. Because many of those countries were not really passable, or looking at a container, that how do you pad it enough so that you can move high-tech equipment on it, because it was not easy to just go do it. So a lot of that was on the rail side. And on international side, of course, we were one of the largest ocean and air shipper in the world. So plenty of complexity around it, and no good technology platform, right? So when you and I got into discussions in 2017, talking about it, a lot of it was back to how do you go build a technology platform, which makes, at the end of the day, when it comes to intermodal, the first thing a shipper or a user is looking for is predictability. Right? Is it predictable to move? Is it reliable to move? Now, chassis play a very big role in it. And because unlike truckload, when you talk about intermodal, whether it's on the marine side or on the rail intermodal, in container doesn't really move on the road, as you say, without a chassis, right? So chassis are again part of that reliability, that quality, that predictability, that how do I go do a move end to end. And we've made a lot of progress. I think in the last 5 years, we have spent well over $100 million in R&D alone to go build the platform on Bloom, working with our railroad partners and working with our ocean carrier partners and our freight forwarding or our IMC partners over time. Now, as you mentioned, we are now part of WiseTech Global, and here's another company which was very much focused on the forwarding market. Right? So from vision perspective, they were focused on, and now they is us, right? Now Bloom is part of WiseTech, an operating platform for freight forwarders around the world. And we were focused on similar customer segment, in there, but it was broader because it included domestic intermodal, not only the marine side or of the business. So there is a very good match between the two companies, and now companies have been combined. It's now month number 5. All of the signs are extremely positive of bringing these two platforms together, and then continuing to serve the industry where there is so much more innovation that needs to happen. I was at the Google conference just yesterday, right? And I think I did one session, which was kind of with where both Sundar Pichai, who is the CEO for Google, and Thomas Kurian, and they were launching what's going on AI and automation and what type of use cases are possible, and just what Google and Microsoft are doing on the AI and machine learning part. We are again focused on similar technology or application of those technologies. And for those of you in audience who don't know, everything we do at Bloom, it runs on Google platform. So Foundation is the Google Cloud, for the Bloom Foundation. So any technology that comes out, whether it's on generative AI side or on automation side, we typically try to use the similar technology to solve the intermodal problems. And I think our focus continues to be that technology is evolving at a faster pace than it has ever evolved. And so I don't know how many of the people would have known about generative AI till ChatGPT got announced earlier this year. Right? So we're living in very exciting times, and many of these business models and other things are going to change in logistics overall, but in intermodal specifically. And our focus as a combined company continues to be the technology provider for the intermodal industry. So and I think Bill, that as I mentioned, intermodal includes all chassis movements too. And now, how do you see the chassis provisioning model evolving over the next 5 years or so?
I think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of the changes that we're going to begin to see over the next 5 years. You've got these supply chain disruptions, which we've had almost continuously, a different one each year, have led to manufacturing sourcing changes from China to Southeast Asia and India. This is going to affect some trade routes from West Coast to East Coast and Gulf ports, through the Suez and Panama Canal. And I think you're seeing a lot of investment by, ports of New York, New Jersey, Savannah, Charleston, the Gulf ports, as well as LA is now gotten some money from the state of California. But you're seeing some major infrastructure projects that are going to improve efficiency through the networks. And one of the things that you brought up, and what shippers are really, most concerned about is predictability. And they demand consistent, reliable service. They need, capacity. Certainly they fell short. Ocean carriers fell short for capacity on, during the pandemic on ship, and certainly our capacity was affected by extended dwell times. But they also want cost competitiveness, and they want some level of control. One of the things you pointed out to me, which I've been in business a long time, but I never really thought about, was the fact that 14 companies are involved. An average of 14 companies are involved in a single import container shipment, and too often these stakeholders don't communicate well, and they operate in silos, and this poor communication leads to missed connections. And so you and I have talked for years about the inevitability of the intermodal industry to move to an integrated pooling model, providing visibility across the supply chain network through tech platforms. It's going to span order management and shipment tracking and equipment forecasting, shipment orchestration, all the things that Bloom is doing through Bloom Maps and your orchestration, so that a shipment can be really tracked from origin to warehouse to last mile. This is going to require improved data networks. We've got a number of initiatives like Flow and others that are trying to come up with common data sets, sharing information across stakeholders. But I also think it's going to take a willingness of, and I'd love to have you comment about this, a willingness of shippers, right, and ocean carriers to invest in technology and services to optimize their supply chain networks. Love to have a statement, then I'll come back and finish up. But that's always been, as chairman of Bloom, that was always something that was, I could never get my arms around the savings that could be derived for, a minimal cost in terms of investment in the technology piece.
And I think it's always been kind of, we'll do very short answer is that kind of you need a champion within any one of these organizations to go push the technology investment forward, right? So by nature, many of the companies that kind of we're looking to invest in, they're not necessarily technology companies, right? So I know kind of there's a convergence of technology and forwarding kind of in the recent years, but you're back to that kind of the core business is, like even if you think of TCLI, core business is chassis itself. Technology is an enabler kind of on that side.
Right.
I think when you talk about the enablers, sometimes kind of you get a very quick return on your investment. Sometimes it takes longer, but it's a question of really the mindset. Kind of I was talking to someone who's been a chief supply chain officer for a long time, right? Kind of in there. And one conversation we got into is where he was back to that the way the world is changing and the adoption of technology, I don't know if I can be the chief supply chain officer in 10 years from now unless I know how to program and how to code and how to understand the technology. We are not there yet, right? So we are back, we're in this transitional mode where kind of, as we know, logistics and technology are joined at the hip, right? Kind of in there. It's a technology problem. Without that, kind of the logistics kind of can't really operate. But we are not yet there where people see it kind of as clearly as we wish that they saw it.
At some point, it's going to be table stakes, right? And people will demand it. I mean, you get more information on ordering a pizza than you do on a shipment with $5 million worth of computer hardware. One of the things that we're really excited about, is DCLI recently opened up a private chassis pool at the Navy Way facility, which is located just outside of APMT in the Port of Los Angeles. We're going to operate the pool with a subscription model, which will guarantee users chassis availability based on their subscriptions. We'll use a reservation system to reserve chassis for up to multiple days. One of the key things you and I have always talked about is developing the ability to do street interchange of assets, right? And that is being built into the product because it will help improve chassis utilization and reduce spare, chassis moves, et cetera. We'll put in an online pay portion of, and quoting tool and chassis tracking. So, the program has kicked off in the last couple of weeks. We're excited about it. I think it gives us a great opportunity to develop some of the programs we've talked about in integrating this all the way to the warehouse. And to that end, we're piloting a number of IoT and GPS tracking devices, which will provide both chassis tracking information, but also chassis and container status information. Working with partners like Bloom and Prologis to offer these additional services, I think is inevitable. And it will allow us to really use the chassis, not as a piece of hardware, but as part of the overall supply chain that will give our customers an ability to monitor their shipments right through to the warehouse. One of the things that the government has stepped in at one point, they were trying to dictate some chassis solutions. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. But it's obvious that one size fits all model, isn't the answer. That you're going to see so many different models develop over the coming years because of specific requirements by BCO, specific requirements by motor carriers, warehousemen, and ocean carriers. So with that, we're excited about developing this sort of portfolio strategy with our customers, where we're happy to net lease them assets. We're happy to develop VIP contracts in our existing pools, or we're happy to look at developing unique pool structures. So if you think about it, what role does technology play, in increasing intermodal share? We're all dependent on a healthy industry, right? How can technology improve overall predictability and increase intermodal share?
Yeah, I think if you think from technology itself, one is that we have moved to an era of platforms versus applications. And and platforms which enable data sharing between multiple parties. Right? So for Bloom, we have a product called now Bloom Maps. Right? So I think a couple of years back, for those of you who are part of IANA, you probably saw a releases from us that we were publishing interline schedules between UP and NS, or interline schedules for the UMAX program, because just getting to that many of these schedules interconnect with each other, and then these schedules change on an ongoing basis. So how do you come back with something which is essentially a digital twin of the world supply chain? And so if you look at Bloom Map today, just as an example, every ocean terminal in the world is on the map, and if every of the rail ramp is on the map, every schedule is available now. The same thing for the airports in there, because when a customer is using intermodal, they don't use only one part, right? So they use multiple pieces to it. If I talk about specifically domestic intermodal on the rail side, I think the percentage is still somewhere around that only 6% moves on rail intermodal, 94% is still truckload or LTL, which does not really move on rail, but it's surface movements. But the rail intermodal share is only about 6%. And if I think our focus has been that how do you go and make it to 10 or 12%? And when we talk to some of our shipper customers, the question is not, is rail as fast as someone moving on truckload side? Question always is that, is it always consistent and always predictable to be able to go do it, right? And when you think of the technology part, right, whether it's the digital twin technology, whether it is what we do with the AI and machine learning to be able to predict delays before they happen, so that your shipper, you're more predictable. All of those would help. Asset optimization itself, I think you talked about street interchanges. I think there is an opportunity for another 20 to 30% improvement in asset utilization just in North America. And when we say North America, we still have not really completely looked at Mexico being part of it, right? So from a supply chain perspective, whether it's high tech, whether it's automotive, so much of the manufacturing and final assembly does happen in Mexico, which needs to come into either US, sometimes to Canada, but mostly to US, from the end consumption by the customers. And again, technology can bring these things together on that side. When I look at the marine component of it, which is also a big part, because about half of all the containers coming into North America touch rail in one fashion or the other. And even there, when I talk about platform which has multiple parties, right? So we think of Bloom, when we built it, there are about 100,000 companies on the platform today, give or take. It might be little off, but somewhere around that number. There are shippers on the platform. There are trucking companies on the platform. There are forwarders on the platform. Of course, railroads are our customers for a long time. Ocean carriers on the platform. Equipment owners can be on the platform as well. Right? And all of these have needs for collaboration and need of data that goes back and forth. And for us to get to this whole asset optimization part, and that how do we minimize the shouldn't say minimize, maximize the use of an asset. And by definition, when you maximize the use of an asset, you need less of them, right? So that's why maximum and minimum go together, right? So and then there's a huge environmental impact associated with it too. And we will continue to stay focused on building this platform, right? Between CargoWise, which is our platform for freight forwarders, and Bloom, which is the platform for shippers and for railroads. I think these platforms will stay focused on it. If I look at my R&D roadmap, I think it's never ending, right? So even though now just on the Bloom side, we are up to somewhere between 400 to 500 engineers who are on the platform. But all of them are being consumed, and then the roadmap just goes on for years to come, right? So there's just so much more to go do. Bill, hopefully that makes sense. Maybe we switch.
It does. And, And again, I think the combination of, both your rail and BCO and the CargoWise, and on trucking, et cetera. I mean, really, you've got a great suite of companies within WiseTech Global to really, sort of be one stop shopping. I mean, I think it was a great merger from that perspective.
And if I will be amiss if I didn't talk about that WiseTech portfolio also includes Trinium and Vase. And so
Right.
if you think of it, there are somewhere around 1,000 trucking companies in North America who run on one of our TMS systems, right? So all of these will converge as you think of kind of over time, kind of from the one platform perspective. But there is a significant kind of amount of drivers, kind of not only in North America, but also in Australia and in Singapore and in China and other places, which are all kind of now on the platform. But maybe we shift back to just the domestic intermodal part, Bill, kind of from DCLI perspective, kind of there's a strong kind of franchise for the domestic chassis to how has that business kind of evolved? And I think if we focus on that kind of from railroad perspective, what do our railroad customers or IMCs need to do to drive the intermodal growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so DCLI acquired a Trax domestic intermodal business in 2018, and we've grown it dramatically over the last 5 years. We now operate a fleet of about 120,000 53-foot domestic chassis. We have the exclusive franchise on the CSX intermodal facilities, the 4 gateways of Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, and Memphis on UP. And probably the most exciting development has been the private container fleet growth on the BNSF. BNSF exited, equipment provisioning, 20 years ago. And now there are as I said, I think there are 130 to 140 private container owners that are currently operating. We're adding 2 to 3 a month. One of the things that you mentioned about predictability, what we can do as an equipment provider to improve predictability is to invest in the assets. And so we invested $1 billion in the last 18 to 21 months on acquiring 40,000 new 53-foot chassis to support the EMP network, the UMAX network, as well as BNSF's private box fleet. We're also focused on improving road service, and we use a Reach platform and a revamped customer service center to improve our road service. Although road service should go down with the investment of the assets, and so that our goal is to have all of our our chassis fleet on radials, which will be significant. But when I was thinking about the growth, right, how is intermodal going to grow? Intermodal has historically grown 5 to 7% a year over the last 20 plus years since 2000. But we've, certainly the last year has been, loadings are down about 6%, and how do we build a better intermodal product? One of the things that I did was I approached a number of rail executives, and I asked them, define consistent, reliable service. What does that mean to you? And one railroad executive had a great answer. He said, truck plus 1 day with 92 to 95% on time ETAs, which you were talking about predictability. Mm-hmm. If the railroads can achieve that, right, that will drive truck traffic, especially because of environmental issues and cost issues, the cost advantages that rail has over truck. It will drive more freight. You see the investments that the railroads are making in terminal automation, new hubs like BNSF's $1.5 billion investment in the Barstow project. right? But the railroads, in order to accomplish this goal of conversion, right, they're going to need to change some of their business processes, right? They're going to have to invest in terminal automation. They're going to have to expand line and hub capacity. One of the big things was which caused the problem during the pandemic was the workforce. They're going to need to hire, train, and in some cases relocate their workforce to areas of higher density. And lastly, they're going to have to continue this push to go vertical by converting to grounded facilities. Now, I've been in the intermodal industry, as I think David said, 40 years. I'm confident that executives like Alan Shaw and Katie Farmer, Jim Hendricks, and Jim Vina, and Jim was, interestingly enough, Jim was on our DCLI board of directors until recently when he was named the CEO of UP. These leaders I think are committed to intermodal growth. They understand carload, the business has sort of plateaued, and their growth is going to be based on this truck to rail conversions, and a process that it's shocking that after 40 years we're at a 6% share. That's got to improve. To demonstrate our commitment, to domestic intermodal, we're going to invest another $1 billion in capex over the next 5 years, and it's really to support both the UP and CSX, but probably more relevant is the growth that we see in the private box sides with Amazon, Walmart, UPS, FedEx, and these other 130 30 customers. So I spent the last few minutes talking about sort of like the next 5 years and things like that. You get the opportunity to tell us, right, what the intermodal industry is going to look like 30 years from now. And I'm hope I'm around. I'll be 98, so I hope I'll be around, and I can take this tape and see how accurate you are.
No, I think so, Bill. I think referring to we're trying to do a thought leadership conference on November 5th and 6th here in San Francisco. So maybe I'll give you a little bit of a context of it, and those of you in audience kind of maybe some of you will be there. But we're trying to set the stage of what will the world economy look like in 2050 before we get to the intermodal in 2050 or 2030 or so. Right? I think last kind of 20 years, we have seen tremendous amount of change in global trade, right? So we have had kind of that lot of manufacturing move to China back in kind of late 2000s, right? So 2007, 8, 9, the recession of 2008, after that it accelerated. Then there was an emergence of India. Then we have had kind of our issues, not only with pandemic, but also kind of the Russia-Ukraine caused kind of disruptions and different relationships. There's the whole emergence of Africa. And I think if you think of by 2050, Africa will have probably I think some predictions are now showing that Africa is where we will have the largest kind of young workforce, and not necessarily in kind of China or India by that time, and it might take over. So there's a lot which is changing on the technology side, right? So the autonomous trucking is real, right? It will be there by that time too. Who knows what will happen on our kind of infrastructures, kind of depending on the country. Kind of many countries are building the infrastructure for the very first time, so they can think of what would it mean to have autonomous trucks on the road. My view has always been that in North America, we have kind of a highway for autonomous kind of movement of freight. It's called railroads. Right? It is all well laid out. Kind of we know that kind of how to get from point A to point B, and it's a pretty good network. And I think kind of it will become more autonomous and more optimized kind of over time. Shorter term, what I do see is that it will continue to get more and more investment, and will continue to get more and more predictable. And I think on the numbers, it all depends on how we look at it, Bill, right? So when you say you're growing at 5 to 7%, kind of on intermodal, and kind of first, is it kind of higher than the total logistics growth? Two, when you're only 6%, if you grow by 5 to 7%, and it's the same amount as the rest grow, the numbers will still look like kind of at 6% in 10 years from now, or maybe it moved to 7, but it's not a big move. What we really need is that how do you grow in double digit a year, right? If we want to go from 6 to 12, kind of the numbers get into that, you have to start growing at kind of double digit every year, kind of on rail. And I think that will happen kind of because there are many other work. I think Norfolk Southern is also working on kind of the grounded facilities for marine containers too. Some of our ocean terminals are heavily automated now, right? And then but they will probably continue to get more and more automated. But I don't know what the future will look like exactly. But all we know that kind of the technology will play a big role in it too, right? So I think even if you talk about the labor shortage and automation and other things, there is going to be an impact on the labor force kind of over the next kind of 30 years as well. But as I said before, kind of it's been interesting times again. Kind of like I think I'm coming up on. It's been more than 35 years of being a software kind of person now, and every few years, the more you think that things have changed, a lot more change happens in the next 5 years, and then the pace is just accelerating. Pace is accelerating of change in the intermodal industry.
I appreciate the conversation here. David, I think we're going to turn it back to you, and I think you may have some questions from the audience.
Yes. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. Bill, this first one is for you. And Pravinder, I'm sure you have that opinion as well. What is your take on the drought in the Panama Canal?
You know, it's I'm actually going to turn it to Pravinder. I mean, you know, we're sitting back. We've got strong operations out of the Houston markets, et cetera. You know, we've always felt that with the change in the manufacturing sourcing into India and Southeast Asia, that's going to really benefit us in the Gulf and in the operations. You know, you're seeing a lot of sort of 100 ships backing up, and it brings everybody's thought to what happened in LA in 21 and 22. But if you look at the queue times and to getting through it, it's not that different. It's not out of whack. So I think that there will be fluidity through that southeast channel. But Pravinder, what are you saying from your end?
I think, I mean, there are two pieces, right? There's a shorter term issue, but you start looking at it, kind of all of the environmental changes kind of are going to impact kind of it's a drought kind of in this particular case that we will have to work through, but we just have to be prepared for these type of disruptions on an ongoing basis to begin with, right? COVID was an example of that disruption kind of that you saw. You can't really control a drought kind of, at least not in a short term kind of from that perspective. I still remember working on when we were trying to expand the Panama Canal, and I think it's been more than a decade at least kind of back that project was there. But the question is not really that kind of what do we really do about the drought in Panama Canal. Question is that kind of how resilient are we and how resilient are our supply chains to be able to reroute things or redirect and use new routes, which is becoming a norm, right? Kind of it's becoming a norm that how we have to continue to look for alternative ways to move goods when these type of things happen.
Very interesting, gentlemen. Next question. You'll have to give me a moment to read through it. The person is asking, to what level of detail are real estate and economic development professionals able to get data on surplus and deficit equipment or utilization details to be able to help or enable lane balance through opportunistic facility and shipper developments?
Pravinder, I'll kick it off and then turn it to you. You know, when we created the pool of pools in 2015, LA, Long Beach was most complex market in the country. We had 12 terminals plus 4 rail terminals. We had about 80,000 chassis that were operating in 3 private pools, and we merged the asset base into pool of pools with Track, DCLI, and Flexi participating. We built information on usage, right? And there's a robust, platform, the Pool of Pool website that goes in and will talk everything about, out of service. It'll talk about usage. It'll talk about on terminal, by terminal. So it was, I think, one of the very first, pools that really gave pure visibility to the use of the assets, within the pool. We work with our ocean carriers on our individual private pools and provide them similar type information on availability. One of the key things that we request in return is accurate forecasting, right? We're working with people like Prologis to get an understanding of how to look at working with our ocean carriers for transloading of marine, containers into 53-foot containers, which we can support them with a chassis, a marine chassis on the front end and a domestic chassis on the back end. So I think certainly reporting has improved, and we're requesting as much information from the warehouse people, David, as they're requesting from us. Pravinder?
Yeah, and I think there are probably 2 pieces, right? If I think of the question on that, what can real estate professionals get and others do? One is there are shorter term changes in demand and supply, and there are longer term changes, right? Longer term changes are kind of much more easier to predict than the shorter ones. And the world has moved to kind of getting real estate on demand. I mean, I think kind of a lot of it has been moving back and forth. So Bill, you mentioned Prologis kind of being one of those where you can get warehousing space on demand to some extent, but we all do it on our personal life too, right? So there are all type of predictions even on things like automotive side, that will people own cars or will they just be renting a car on demand? Same thing is going on for the for the real estate specifically too. And as Bill mentioned, kind of by nature, where our terminals are, whether it's for ocean or for rail, they are in places where real estate is pretty expensive to get. Right? So it's not kind of that easy to produce more real estate in LA, Long Beach, right? So I know we both Bill and I live in San Francisco area, where some of the San Francisco is on reclaimed land, Bill, but other than that, there is not really much that you can do to create land, even in the Oakland area or so. So it's just back to kind of like monitoring the longer term trends is kind of one side. And then a lot of that data is available now from multiple sources, right? As Bill mentioned, kind of even on pool. But then there's a shorter term that there will be fluctuations in demand, right? During the COVID, we saw a lot of demand for space in some of the terminal areas too. The demand is reducing now, but it might pick up again. So how do you kind of continue to monitor overall demand and supply trends? It is how.
One thing that is interesting to me is, having been in the rail trucking side for most of my career, and then the marine side for the last 11 years, there are a number of ports that do a very good job in real estate development. And, mostly those are ports that have land associated with. So Savannah, Charleston, and some of the southern ports. And that drives freight, through the port. So it's a very symbiotic. They work with their states. They work with major shippers, whether they're car companies or Amazon or et cetera, to provide real estate that they can build out for transload facilities and major warehouse development. I think a number of railroads are beginning to take a closer look at this. We've talked to people at BN and other Class 1 railroads. I think they can do a better job utilizing land in the proximity of the rail facilities, right? That ultimately will drive freight, from the highway to rail. And so that's one thing, David, that we're kind of looking at closely. I know people like Prologis are doing the same, but certainly the real estate play, especially if you're looking at going into the integrated, equipment, pooling model with that tech platform, with the depot and warehouse components. We'll be spending more and more time on it.
Fascinating response. Thank you, gentlemen. One last question we have. In the coming decades, do you foresee more short sea shipping along coasts and within the Great Lakes and inland waterways using container utilization, given Jones Act cost obstacles and traditional market perspectives?
Ravinder, I'll let you kick this off. I'm not that educated in this area.
No, I think if you think of it, for many parts of the world, right, especially if you look at Europe and what happens on bargeage and how the canal system gets used in there. Even in North America, there's some usage, right? So if you think kind of the areas around Maryland, kind of or so, there still is a increased utilization of containers to move on that side. If you think of Mississippi, I know a couple of long time kind of logistics professionals have been working around St. Louis area, that how do we kind of make more effective use of the shipping kind of from that perspective for containerized moves, and that trend will continue kind of over time. I think the short sea it is also interesting, right? So when we look at the ocean carriers around the world, kind of on one perspective, it looks like the top 10 ocean carriers have somewhat 80% of the international container moves or so. But then there are kind of another 100 kind of ocean carriers who all operate kind of in the short sea or the lake regions and others, kind of not as much in US as we see in Europe today, but all of that kind of will naturally evolve over the next few decades, because it's another way for us to move goods kind of around either Great Lakes or Mississippi or rest of the canal systems in Europe.
Thank you. Well, gentlemen, we have come to the end of the hour. I think this has been a fascinating discussion, and it certainly has given me a lot to think about. And a lot to reflect about, especially when you start talking about 2050. I suddenly went, how old am I going to be in 2050? And I didn't like that response. So just as a couple closing remarks, we do have a slide up that shows contact detail. If you have any follow-up questions for either Bill or Pravinder, you can reach out to them at Bloom Global, marketing@bloomglobal.com, or DCLI, customer service @dcli.com. And then also, please don't forget that there is still time to register for Intermodal Expo. Coming up on September 11 to 13 in Long Beach. There's still opportunities through the end of this month to register online, and after that you'll have to register in person. And also, don't forget to visit our upcoming education page to see upcoming webinars, as well as, again, we'll notify you when this session is available for you to view on demand. Bill, Pravinder, thank you so very much. Thank you to Bloom Global for making this opportunity happen, and I hope everyone has a great holiday weekend.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Pravinder.
Thank you. Bye-bye.